So in today's video, I'm going to be walking you through the step-by-step process for creating the first version of your directory database inside of Airtable. Let's get into it. What's going on, friends? Welcome back to the channel. So in the last post that I put on my website and also YouTube, I went over how you can use the Webflow CMS to create dynamic listing pages for your directory. As I mentioned in the video, it's the 80-20 of creating the customer-facing experience of your directory, because you can just create your listing page and then replicate it over and over and over again. Now, one of the questions that came up quite a lot is, if we can do all of this inside of Webflow, why exactly do we need to use tools like Airtable or WhaleSync? Why don't we just save that money and instead just do everything inside of Webflow directly? Now, this is a completely valid question, and the short answer is yes. If we wanted, we could actually just do all of this inside of Airtable. So if you wanted, you could just come in here, you could click on create a new CMS item, and then you could just go through the process of filling all of this out. And this actually works kind of fine as you're just starting out. But where things start to fall apart is when your directory starts to scale. Now, you might be wondering, how do I know this? And the answer is, I know it because that is exactly what happened to me when I started my first ever directory, which is the Unicorn Factory. Now, for those of you who don't know, a few years ago, I started a talent directory, freelancer marketplace, call it what you want, called the Unicorn Factory. And the idea behind it was to basically list a bunch of local freelancers on this website, and then clients could simply go ahead, fill out the contact form, and I would then connect them with the different freelancers. Now, the way that it started was exactly as a lot of you described. I just started off inside of Webflow, and the way that I would add more people to my freelancer directory was typically that they would email me. I would then ask them for an image, and then as soon as they would send me all of that, I would just jump into the Webflow CMS and just manually add every single one of them. Now, doing this at the very beginning wasn't really a problem because, one, it only took me roughly 5 to 10 minutes in order to fill out all of the different CMS fields. And secondly, there were not really that many freelancers that were super eager to join the platform early on. But as the platform started to get more popular, the sooner my inbox started to fill up with people also wanting to have profiles on there. And whilst I was keeping up with it for a while, I realized pretty early on that if the platform continues to grow, I'm going to find myself in a situation where I'm not going to be able to do all of that. And that's when I decided it was time to add a system that would allow me to do all of this at scale. Now, in order for me to be able to do this at scale, there were two significant changes I needed to make. And number one, I had to start automating all of the repetitive tasks that I was doing, like adding new freelancers to the Webflow CMS or forwarding on inquiries that clients would make to freelancers. And then the second part of all of this was I needed to set up an infrastructure that allowed me to manage a large amount of data at scale. And so that is how I discovered Zapier, which was the automation tool that I used, and Airtable, which became my database tool. Now, eventually I decided to move on from Zapier because there were different automation tools that were cheaper and just kind of better as well. But Airtable has stayed my go-to database tool. And trust me, there are a lot of different options out there these days. But when it comes to finding the perfect balance between ease of use and flexibility, honestly, Airtable is unbeatable. However, one of the things that I have noticed just by talking to different people wanting to build directories is that using a relational database tool like Airtable for the very first time can seem a little bit intimidating. So I've decided that in this video, I'm going to show you two different ways that you can use to build the first version of your database inside of Airtable so that you can ensure that as your directory starts to scale, everything is in place to allow you to do exactly that. Now, before we dive into the meat of all of it, I did want to quickly remind everyone that I am currently working on a new course for my online community, the MVMP Labs, where I'm going to be taking you through the exact step-by-step process for setting up a directory business like the running directory. Now, we are about a week away from onboarding the first few people who I'll be taking through the process of setting this up. And we're really going to be covering everything. We're going to be going over, how to pick your niche, how to do keyword research, how you can then also actually build your directory. We'll also be going into some marketing stuff, how to make money, all those kind of things. The idea is to really give you a playbook that you can follow to get your directory up and running and launched. If you are interested in this, all you need to do right now is join the waitlist, and you will get an email sometime next week with a bit of an update on what it is that we're doing and how you can actually get started. With that being said, let's dive into how we can create the brain of any directory, which is your database. Okay, now, before we dive into the weeds, the first thing that we want to really just get out of the way is, what is even the purpose of a database? Now, as you know, in the previous videos, I showed you how we use a tool like Webflow in order to create the customer-facing side of our directory, our website, so to speak. And so oftentimes why we use Airtable in that context is that we want to basically store all of the information that will later on be listed inside of our Webflow site, so that we can, one, do things like data manipulation, but most importantly, to actually have a copy of the record inside of Airtable in case something accidentally gets deleted inside of Webflow. Now, as your platform starts to grow, as you start to identify new use cases, there's going to be a need for a whole bunch of different tools that you're going to end up having to use on your platform. For example, you might want to start taking payments, in which case you'll start using a tool like Stripe. Then you might also want to start using research tools like Perplexity AI or Apify. And basically, as soon as your directory gets to the point where you are using a bunch of different tools to power it, then what you need to do is make sure that there is consistency between all of the different data points. And so that is where we use a database. Now, if I look at it from a less technical perspective, I really look at Airtable as my admin portal. This is where I control the flow of all data that comes into my directory and that might go out to other platforms. So for example, as I covered in one of the previous videos, one of the big parts of building out a directory website is to find high quality data that you can use inside of your directory. And so you can use a bunch of tools like Perplexity AI and Make.com to basically go out and find different data sources. Now, instead of just sending all of that information blindly to the Webflow CMS and then having to fix a bunch of things, what I actually do first is I first send it to my central data repository, which is Airtable, so that I can first review all of the data that was found before I make any decisions to then send it to any other tools. Now, there are tons of use cases where you might want to have a certain level of control of how information flows between the different tools in your platform. One of another example here is when, for example, a freelancer applies to join your directory. Now, if you're building a business directory, this can be if a new business wants to be listed on your site. So typically, once they've submitted all of the information, you might first want to actually review their profile to see if they're even a good fit for what it is that you are doing on your site. So being able to, first of all, review all of it before it gets sent to Webflow to create a page for them is absolutely crucial. But besides just having the Airtable to Webflow relationship, there are going to be a whole bunch of other ways that data exchanges on your platform. For example, if a client reaches out to one of the businesses or talents in your directory, you might want to first review the message to ensure that the client is not just spamming every single person on your site. And so once again, having a way for you to pull the information in from whatever data source you have, and to then have a manual process in place to review it before you then take action to move it out to wherever else it has to go, is an incredibly important step to ensuring that the actual quality of your platform stays high. Now, the short version of all of this is essentially, if you want your directory to scale, you're going to need to have systems in place that will allow you to scale. And the key components in order to make that happen is, one, the automation side of things. But the automation side of things will only work if you have a good data management system in place, which in this case is your database. Now, before I move on to showing you how exactly you set up your database, I actually just want to show you one more quick little thing inside of Make.com so that you can really understand how the database fits into all of this. Now, let's just take this example here. I've got a workflow that I believe does research into different data that I have inside of Airtable. And basically the way it works is I retrieve the information, I then go and run a Perplexity AI workflow that basically does some research or some data enrichment step. Then I have an OpenAI step that formats it correctly, and then I store it inside of Airtable. Now, again, what I want to illustrate here is that I don't just send the information that has been researched and formatted directly to Webflow, because things break, information is inaccurate, and if you want to ensure that the quality of the information on your platform and the way that you communicate with your client stays high, you're just going to need this in-between step. And so as soon as it gets to this stage here, that is when I'll then set up a separate workflow for then, for example, sending data to Webflow, or maybe sending a client a confirmation email that their site has been listed. And that is what will allow you to manage data efficiently in your directory. Now, there are two different ways that I recommend starting out with building out your database. The first way is a way that I've kind of covered vaguely in some of the previous videos, and the other one is kind of a little bit of a cheat code. So let's start off with the simple one. The first way that I actually recommend approaching setting up your database is starting with the end in mind. So have a think about the directory that you want to set up and think about what it is that people will actually see. So in the case of the running directory, my vision for it was to basically create a website that would list all of the races in Canada and all of the run clubs in Canada. And so with that in mind, I can actually jump into Webflow and I can start kind of brainstorming what everything will look like. So the first thing that I would probably want to look at is one, what will the actual listing page for all of the different races look like? And so now you can kind of see I've got an about section, I've got various metadata, I've got a location and all those types of things. And as soon as you can start to imagine what this page will look like, you understand what information in this page will be dynamic. Now, what do I mean by this? So by dynamic content, I basically mean content that will change from page to page. So if I switch to another page, you'll see that quite a few things have changed. Number one, the image has changed, the event date has changed, the location has changed, the actual name of the event has changed, even things like the weather, the temperature, all those kind of things have basically changed because they are actually unique to that individual listing that I have added. And so once you have kind of broken down what the individual elements are that are going to be unique, then you'll be in a position where you understand what CMS collections you'll need to create and what the individual fields are within that CMS collection that you then need to add. So if we go and have a look at the race series CMS collection, you can see that I had to create a unique field for the title, card description, location, about section, the race image, gallery images, all those types of things. And now that I actually have this structure here, I already have the first idea of the type of information that I should add to my Airtable base. Now, you can take this even further because this is just one particular collection. But if, for example, you want to create unique landing pages for the different locations, then that is another collection that you're going to need to set up. So once again, you just want to go through the process and think about, if I create a location specific page, what information am I going to need to collect in order for me to populate it with the right data? And so in this particular case, what I have done is I have simply gone ahead and added fields for the SEO title, the meta description, the city image, all of the dynamic content that you'll find on that particular page. And this is really what will set the foundation for how you should then later on go ahead and structure your Airtable database. So if we go and have a look at what the first version of the running directory database looks like, I've got a table for my my race series, my race events, my race distances, basically all of the CMS collections that I have created inside of Webflow. Now, as soon as you have all of the individual fields inside of each CMS collection, then you can go through the process of actually creating the equivalent field inside of Airtable. So if, for example, in Webflow, you're using a single line text for the actual event title, then do the same thing here. Just add a single line text, and then you just want to go ahead and repeat that process over and over again until you have basically a replica of what your Webflow CMS looks like. Because with that replica, you can then map those fields up to each other and set up a workflow that automatically syncs the data back and forth. Now, this is usually the part that people find easier, because when people have ideas for their directory, they usually have some form of visual inspiration as to what their different pages will look like. So all you need to do here is really create the CMS abstraction of it and then translate the CMS abstraction into the actual database version of it. And then before you know it, everything will naturally evolve from here. However, there'll be certain instances where you won't actually have the Airtable to Webflow relationship, meaning that you might need to manage a certain types of data that actually never gets sent to Webflow. An example of that can be one, messages. So if on a talent directory or a business directory, a customer fills out a contact form on one of these pages. Now, you're not going to end up sending that to the Webflow CMS. However, you do still need to store that information because that might tie into some of the other workflows that you're later on going to use to automate certain parts of your workflow. So for example, forwarding on the inquiry to the business in your directory. And so what you want to do here is you also want to think about, okay, what kind of information is being exchanged in my platform? Where do I store the information? What fields do I need? And that will ultimately determine what all of the other fields and all of the other tables look like that are not directly linked to an integration like Webflow. Another example of a table that you might want to set up that is not directly linked to something like Webflow is payments. Now, with payments, really what you're doing is you are taking information that you're receiving from your payment processor like Stripe, and you're essentially storing that information inside of your Airtable base. Now, why is that important to have in this particular tool here? Well, because let's say, for example, you have a premium model for your businesses, and if they go and pay you through Stripe, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you can store the transaction in here so that you can then actually link the transaction that was made to the freelancer account and then trigger, for example, a workflow that updates, for example, the Webflow CMS with like a premium tag. And so ultimately, really what you want to think about is one, what is the information that is being displayed in various places? What is the information that's being exchanged across different platforms? And then what you want to do is structure your tables in content buckets in a way that makes sense so that it's easy to then set up workflows to transfer all of the data wherever it is that you want. Now, I've got one more way that I'm going to show you to set up a directory, and this way is really cheating, but it is fun and it is easy, and I think is particularly suited to anyone who might just be getting started with all of this. But before I do dive into that, I just want to quickly share some thoughts around the mindset to get into before you go ahead and build out your database. Now, one of the things that I see people do when they build their directory is they completely overcomplicate what it is that the first version of the directory will look like. And the way that that shows is that they have way too many tables, way too many fields, and they have no clue what is going on anywhere. So really what you want to think about when you are building this out is that this should really be a tool that will assist you in managing data on this platform. And the best way to start is to just keep it simple. So if you even just start out by thinking about the different information that you'll want to display inside of your directory website, bucket it into different contents, think about the different landing pages that there'll be, that is more than enough to get started. Over time, as you add more features, your database will evolve. And so this is my current version of my database, but it's changed quite a bit over the last 2-3 weeks, and it's going to change even more over the next few months. And so ultimately, don't worry about it all being perfect on day one. Just focus on getting it done. Now, let's jump to the second method, which is honestly a cheat. And yes, you guessed correctly, we're just going to use ChatGPT to do it. Now, there are actually two parts of this, and this will really speed up the process for actually building your directory. In fact, I am going to be building an entire database for a directory in real time, so you can kind of see how easy this is. But one thing that ChatGPT is really good at is to build out schemas for databases. And schemas is just a fancy word for structures. So all you need to do is jump in here and describe what kind of directory you want to build. So what I'm going to say is I am building a website for finding not directories, let's say co-working spaces in Canada. So we're going to go directory website for finding co-working spaces in Canada. I am using Airtable as my database tool. And this part's important because if you were not to include this, it would assume that you're using a super fancy database tool. just by saying Airtable, it will tell you what the different field types are that you need. The way it works is that people will be able to browse through listing pages that can be categorized. Let's just say can browse through listing pages. I want to create location specific landing pages, and that is it. And then I'm going to say create a simple database schema for me with information that you think I will need. And then we'll go and hit the send button. Now, I'll probably say the results that you typically get from this are like an 8 out of 10. There will be certain things that are not quite exactly what you want, but I oftentimes find that it actually does a pretty good job. Now, here's what it will do. The first thing that it will do is it will tell you what tables to create, and then it will tell you within each table what fields you should create. So you can see here it says, well, you need a name field, which is fairly obvious. Then it will say you need you'll need a slug field, and the slug field here is recommended to be a formula field. Skeptical about that, but it will basically tell you what it thinks is the most suited one. So yeah, just go ahead and do that. Then we've got location for city and provinces. Then we've got address, longitude, latitude, description, amenities, price ranges, day pass price, monthly price, website, all those kind of things. So kind of like the things that you would imagine. So if you are really starting from scratch and you're not 100% sure and you've done like zero research into your market, then this is something that will really help you get things up and running. Then it will also say, hey, okay, for your location specific landing pages, we're also going to need a collection for our locations. And so here are all the different fields that you should collect. Then we might also need one for reviews. Now, reviews are definitely a good one to have. However, this might not be something that we need a separate collection for inside of Webflow. Tags might also not. So really what we want as a starting point is probably something like co-working spaces and then something like locations. So then what I'll do ahead and I'll I'll just go ahead and I'll say, okay, let's stick with the first two options, which is co-working space and location, and now create a CSV file with 5 sample records for each table. And so what we're doing now is we're basically saying, okay, number 1 sounds good, number 2 sounds good. Go ahead and create a CSV file for us with sample records that we can use. And what will happen is ChatGPT will now just go through the process of creating a CSV file that we can then later on download and then use to start our directory database. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video here, and once this is done, I'll return and we're going to finish this up inside of Airtable. Alrighty, so we have got our CSV file, so I'm going to start the download. Then we've got the location CSV. I'm going to download this as well. And now that we've downloaded these 2 files, I'm going to go to airtable.com and we're going to create a new base. So step number 1 is going to be to click on the nice big create button. Oh my God, Arc sometimes is annoying. We're going to start from scratch. And then what we're going to do is we're going to click on where it says table 1, and we're going to click on import data, and we're going to click on CSV file. So what we're going to do next is we're going to click on browse files, and you'll see that it has downloaded your CSV file. And then what we're going to do is we are simply going to upload our CSV file. So it's going to basically show you all of the different data that has arrived. And what we can do now is we can simply go ahead and click on import. Now, few things. This works well. However, what Airtable doesn't do well in this part of the process is selecting the right type of fields. So what I recommend doing is going back to your prompt and having a look at what field type was recommended. So single line text. We'll skip the formula part for now, and we'll also make some change to the location. But other than that, just follow all of the different recommendations that you get. So in this case, I'm going to change this one here to a single line text. Boom. And then I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to change my slug field to a single line text. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to go through all of the different options. Now, I only really have one rule when it comes to selecting field types inside of Airtable, and that is to not use multi-select fields. Now, why is that? The reason for that is that it doesn't translate well when it comes to sending data through different platforms. So in order to completely avoid confusion, what I actually just tell people to do is to not use the multi-select field in here. There are different ways that you can use multi-selects in a platform like this. For example, using, multi-reference field. But for now, all I need you to do is just to make sure that they are single select fields. Now, one other thing that we're going to need to do is import our other table. So we're going to go in here and we're going to import our locations table. And obviously you can build on this. Now, a lot of the decisions that you'll need to make around, what kind of tables you create and what kind of, data types you have will tie into, some of the keyword research that you're going to do. But, depending on what it is that you're working on, it's going to be different for every single directory. So I just recommend experimenting around with it. If you have any questions throughout this process, just feel free to reach out. I'm more than happy to help. Now, one of the key advantages that you get from using a tool like Airtable, which is a relational database, is that you can actually link different data types to each other. So in this particular case, we want to link the actual co-working space, and I'm actually going to rename these tables, to the location table. And the reason why we want to do this is going to become very clear very soon. So, in short, what we're going to do is we're going to click on the location table and we're going to change the field type to linked records. And what we're doing here is we're essentially creating a relationship between the records inside of our locations table and our co-working space table. And so you can see here, it creates this link to each other. And this link is essentially the equivalent of the reference field that you will find inside of Webflow. So if we go in here, you can see there's a reference field for the different cities that a race is in. And the main reason why we want to link them up to each other is because then when we go ahead and create our landing pages for our cities, we can use that linked record field type to filter out the different races or listings based on the actual location. And so when we jump back into Airtable, you can now see how this relationship has created a link in Airtable as well. And so now whenever we create landing pages for different locations, it will know what co-working spaces to add to that particular page. Now, there are tons and tons of additional things that you can do inside of Airtable, but just for the sake of time and not wanting to bombard you with tons and tons of information, I would actually recommend that you stop the video here, jump into ChatGPT, create the first version of your directory schema, import it like this, fix up all the field types, and that will then essentially set the foundation for you to then go ahead and start setting up your first few workflows where you start sending information from Airtable to Webflow, or you can even then check out my video on how to find and organize high quality data where you can then start using automation tools to do research to populate your database. Now, I know, when you're introduced to new tools like these, it can sometimes feel a little bit overwhelming. If that is you, don't even stress it. Everyone is in that position when you start learning new things. So all you can really do is just get started and then just kind of learn from there. So if there are any questions about it, you know where the comment section is. Also keep in mind that I will be creating the written version of this video where I'm going to also be answering questions and adding extra resources. So check that link out as well. And then last but not least, and I'm going to sell out one last time, the directory playbook is just around the corner. So if you are interested, join the waitlist and I'll email you sometime this week about what the next steps are. With that being said, hey, thanks so much for watching the entire video and I'll see you back here for the next one. Bye.